Marcus could feel it the moment the massive doors shut behind him with a thundering boom. The air was heavy, humid, carrying the faint metallic tang of alien incense. The walls were slabs of polished obsidian inlaid with veins of gold, carved into twisting, almost serpentine patterns that seemed to move if you stared too long. Enormous pillars rose like the trunks of blackened trees, their roots sunk deep into the marble floor, their tops disappearing into shadow far above the guards. Flanking him were silent, their scaled hands gripping sleek plasma rifles that hummed with a faint, ominous charge. Their armor was pitch black and faceted like insect shells, their helmets hiding all expression except for the faint glow of green eye slits at the far end of the chamber. Raised high on a broad dais of black stone sat the alien queen. Her throne was carved from a single block of obsidian, its back shaped like the open jaws of some ancient predator. She leaned forward slightly as Marcus approached, her clawed hands resting on the carved armrests, her crest flaring subtly in interest. The Varethi queen was not simply regal, she was predatory grace embodied. Her elongated skull was crowned with a ridge of bone plated in gold, her slit-pupilled eyes glowing faintly with an inner light. Her scales were a deep crimson edged with black, each one gleaming like polished armor. When she spoke, her voice carried a resonance that vibrated. In Marcus's bones, human. The word was both a greeting and an accusation. You have trespassed into my sovereign world. You have killed my warriors. Give me one reason not to execute you where you stand. Marcus was still several meters from her, but her presence pressed down on him like a physical weight. His wrists were bound together by a thin filament of pale blue energy, a restraint that burned at the skin if he twisted too hard. His uniform, once a clean slate gray of the Terran Defense Forces, was torn and stained with streaks of dried blood and alien dust. He had been dragged here directly from the outer jungle, and his boots still carried its dirt. But despite the state he was in, his posture was not that of a defeated prisoner. His shoulders were back. His gaze didn't waver. He met the queen's eyes without flinching, a dangerous move. Given the Varethi viewed prolonged eye contact as a challenge, he didn't answer her question. Instead, he took one slow, deliberate step forward until the guards tensed, rifles coming up. He stopped, subtly shifting his stance, not enough to seem aggressive, but just enough to keep his body squarely between them and what he was hiding behind him in the shadows near the Tivin entrance. Something small shifted. But the guards didn't notice. The queen's eyes narrowed. You defy me even in chains? Marcus's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. The only sound in the hall was the faint hum of the rifles, the distant hiss of the incense braziers, and the low, steady thump of his own heartbeat in his ears. Her crest flattened, a sign of irritation. She lifted one clawed hand, palm outward, in a deliberate, ritualized gesture. Every guard in the chamber moved in perfect synchrony, their weapons locking onto his chest. The queen's voice dropped into something cold and final. Kill him. The command echoed like the toll of a bell, and then, before a single trigger was pulled, two shapes emerged from behind Marcus. Small shapes. They stepped hesitantly into the light spilling from the high windows, their talons clicking faintly against the marble floor. They were Zarethi children, barely reaching Marcus's waist. Their scales were a softer hue, more orange than crimson, with delicate crests that had not yet hardened into the full ridges of adulthood. Their eyes were wide and unblinking, locked onto the queen with a mix of fear and relief. The chamber froze. The guards hesitated mid-trigger squeeze, eyes darting between their weapons targeting reticles and the two small figures now standing. In the open, the queen's posture shifted instantly. Her eyes widened, her crest lifting in disbelief. She took one involuntary step forward, her voice breaking from its practiced regal tone into something raw, almost trembling. Carol, Syrah, her daughters. The two small figures clinging to Marcus's legs looked fragile compared to the towering guards and the vast throne. The older of the two, Carol, if Marcus remembered the name right, peered out from behind his leg with cautious defiance. The younger, Syrah, was pressed entirely against him, small talons hooked into the fabric of his trousers as though afraid he might disappear. The queen's golden eyes were locked on them, wide and unguarded. For a heartbeat, she was not the ruler of a hostile empire. She was a mother seeing her children after believing them lost. She stepped down from the dais, her movements slow but deliberate. The polished obsidian floor mirrored her crimson-scaled form as she descended each step, the sound of her talons a soft, measured click. Her guards shifted but did not lower their weapons, their crests twitching in confusion. No one in the court dared speak. When she reached the base of the dais, she stopped just a few feet from Marcus. Her gaze flicked from his scarred, dirt-streaked face to the children half hidden behind him. Carol, Syrah, she said again, this time in the soft, rippling tones of the Varithi's private familial dialect, a language Marcus had heard only once before, whispered by the girls in their sleep. The children moved as one, their eyes shimmering, but they didn't step forward. Instead, they pressed closer to Marcus, as if the towering figure before them was not the protector they remembered, but the stranger they feared. The queen's crest lowered, the ridges smoothing in something like shame. "How?" she asked, her voice tight, controlled, but with a tremor beneath. Marcus didn't step aside, he didn't kneel. He simply looked her in the eye and answered. "Your warlords raided a Terran medical convoy 3 months ago," he said, his tone low but carrying in the silent hall. "They thought they were grabbing diplomats, hostages they could parade. They didn't know they'd taken your daughters." A murmur spread among the court nobles in silks of shimmering scale fabric, aids with ceremonial helms. Shock, disbelief, and the occasional flicker of fear rippled through the gathered assembly. Marcus's voice remained steady. "By the time we realized who they were already on the move. When word got out that the queen's own children were being held by a rogue faction, every predator in this system started circling. Your enemies wanted leverage. My commanders wanted intelligence." He took a half step forward, not threatening, but forcing her to meet his gaze. "I wasn't about to let either side get what they wanted." Her eyes narrowed, but it wasn't in anger. She was studying him, weighing his words against the truth she could read in the children's eyes. "You could have delivered them to any faction in the Outer Rim," she said slowly, almost incredulously. "You could have traded them for safety, for wealth beyond what your human mind can imagine. Instead, you brought them here, to me." Marcus's lips twitched, not into a smile, but into something sharper. "I don't sell kids. Doesn't matter if they're human, Varethi, or anything in between." That simple sentence seemed to fracture something in the air. The nobles exchanged glances, their crests flicking in unspoken disbelief. In their political world, children, especially royal children, were bargaining chips. To hear a soldier from an enemy species reject that concept outright was almost absurd. The queen's gaze dropped to her daughters. Cairo's small crest fluttered uncertainly. Syrah's grip on Marcus's leg was unrelenting. The queen took another slow step forward, lowering herself slightly so she wasn't towering over them. "Carol, Syrah, come to me," she said softly. They hesitated, their eyes flicking between Marcus and their mother. When neither moved, the queen's jaw tightened, but she didn't push further. Instead, she straightened and turned her eyes back to him. "You risked your life for my bloodline. While I was preparing to have you executed," she said, her voice low and dangerous. "That's about the size of it," Marcus replied. For a moment, They simply stared at each other, predator and soldier, mother and rescuer, enemies bound by a strange, fragile thread. Then the queen spoke again, her voice suddenly sharp enough to cut through the chamber's stillness. "Lower your weapons." The order cracked through the air like a whip. The guards obeyed instantly, though some did so with visible reluctance. Plasma rifles dipped toward the floor, but their eyes remained locked on Marcus. For the first time since he had been dragged into the palace, Marcus let his shoulders relax just slightly, but his stance remained defensive. He knew better then. To think this meant he was safe. The queen stepped closer, her shadow spilling over him. "You have bought yourself a stay of execution, human," she murmured. "But make no mistake, our war is not over." Marcus met her stare, his voice even. "Then maybe this is your chance to change the ending." The queen said nothing, but she didn't tell her guards to take him away either. Her voice, when it came, was lower, calmer, but threaded with dangerous steel. "You could have taken them anywhere. Any faction would have shielded you, fed you, made you untouchable. Yet you brought them here. To me." Marcus didn't look away. "I wasn't keeping them for leverage. And I sure as hell wasn't giving them to someone who'd use them as pawns." A ripple of disbelief passed through the court. The Varethi nobles lining the walls glanced at one another, their crests fluttering in quiet communication. To them, this was unthinkable. Everything had value. Everyone had a price. Children, especially royal children, were not spared from that cold equation. The queen tilted her head, her golden eyes narrowing as if trying to pierce through his skull. "Your species wages war on us. You've killed my warriors. You've burned our outposts. And yet, when the moment came, you risked your life for my bloodline." Marcus's voice was flat, but not cold. "I don't make war on kids. That's the line. You cross it, you're no better than the bastards you're fighting." The queen's crest twitched at his bluntness. The Varethi hated ambiguity, but they also hated defiance, yet Marcus's words carried neither fear nor flattery. He wasn't bargaining. He wasn't even asking for mercy. Silence settled again, heavy and taut. The queen's gaze shifted to her daughters. The older one, Kirill, was watching her carefully, eyes full of a wariness no child should have to carry. The younger Sira, still, clung to Marcus's leg, as though his battered human frame was a fortress in itself. Marcus adjusted his stance slightly, positioning himself so both children were behind the line of his shoulders. The motion was subtle, but it did not go unnoticed. A low hiss came from one of the guards, half in frustration, half in disbelief. The queen silenced it with a flick of her claw. "You have bought yourself a stay of execution, human," she said finally. "But understand this. The war between our peoples continues. Saving my daughters will not erase the blood already spilled." Marcus allowed himself the faintest smile, one without humor. "Then maybe this is your chance to change the ending." Her eyes narrowed. "You think a single act of mercy will alter the course of two civilizations?" "No," Marcus said simply. "But it's a start," the court whispered again. To the Varethi, such words were naive, almost laughable. But there was something in the queen's posture now, something subtle but unmistakable. She had lowered her guard, if only slightly. The queen gave a sharp gesture. "Lower your weapons." The guards obeyed, though reluctantly. The tension in the air didn't vanish, it simply shifted. Instead of the focused intent to kill, the atmosphere now thrummed with wary curiosity. Marcus, still bound by the filament cuffs, glanced down at the children. "You two okay?" he asked quietly. Kirill gave a small nod. Sira just gripped him tighter. The queen's eyes softened imperceptibly at the sight, but she masked it quickly. She stepped closer until she was only a meter away. Even with her posture relaxed, her presence was immense. She was a predator accustomed to dominating the space around her. "You will remain in my custody," she said, "not as a prisoner, but not as a guest either." Marcus arched a brow. "That's a fine distinction. It is the only one you will get." She turned sharply, her cloak of layered silk scales swirling in a crimson arc behind her. The court watched as she strode back toward the dais, but she did not signal for the guards to take Marcus to the dungeons. Instead, she gave a command that stunned everyone present. "Escort him and my daughters to the royal wing. Keep them together." The murmurs that followed were a storm of disbelief. The human soldier who had entered the throne room moments ago on the brink of execution was now being led away under royal protection, with the queen's own children at his side. As they walked, Chiral glanced up at him. She didn't kill you," she whispered, as though still processing it. "Guess she's smarter than she looks," Marcus murmured back, earning a tiny, stifled laugh from the older girl. Behind them, the queen remained seated on her throne, her gaze distant. She had not forgiven him. She had not abandoned the war. Marcus expected that being escorted to the royal wing was just a polite way of saying house arrest in a gilded cage. And in a sense, it was. The quarters they placed him in were absurd by military standards: high vaulted ceilings, walls draped in flowing silks that shimmered between violet and gold under the alien light, floors of polished stone so smooth they reflected like dark water. The only real security was 2 guards posted at the door. That told him one thing: the queen didn't see him as a flight risk. Or maybe she just knew there was nowhere in this palace he could run without being caught in seconds. The surprise was that the queen's daughters, Tyrell and Syrah, were left with him. They refused to leave his side even when palace attendants came with trays of food. In their presence, the usual formality of Earthly servants dissolved into awkward glances and half bows. No one dared question the arrangement, but it was obvious that the court was buzzing with speculation. By the second day, Marcus was certain his very existence in the palace was fueling rumors. A human soldier, walking freely under royal orders, dining in the queen's wing, guarded not by soldiers, but by the 2 young princesses themselves. And the queen was watching. She summoned him daily, not to interrogate him in the traditional sense, but to study him. The meetings were in a small, private council room, attended only by her and the 2 girls. She would ask him about human warfare, about Terran politics, about why his species fought the way it did. Sometimes the questions were sharp and strategic. Other times, they bordered on personal. "You have lost comrades to my warriors," she said once, watching his expression closely. "Yet you risked your life for my bloodline." "Why?" "Because it was the right thing to do," Marcus replied. Without hesitation, her eyes narrowed. "The right thing? That is a dangerous luxury in war. Not if you want to live with yourself afterward," he said. It was the first time she didn't respond immediately. The uneasy truce held, but it was tested sooner than either of them expected. On the 5th night of his stay, Marcus woke to the faint scent of ozone-burnt air from a plasma discharge. He sat up instantly, scanning the room. The guards outside his door were gone. He was on his feet in seconds, moving toward the sound of rapid footsteps in the hallway. The moment he opened the door, a bolt of blue plasma screamed past his head, scorching the frame. 3 figures in dark combat armor were forcing their way down the corridor toward his quarters. Assassins, not palace guards. Their weapons weren't aimed at him, though. They were aimed at the small figures in the room behind him. The children. Marcus didn't think. He moved. The first assassin came in close, expecting him to retreat. Marcus stepped into the strike, catching the attackers, weapon arm and driving an elbow into their helmet. The second fired at point-blank range. Marcus yanked the first assassin into the shot, letting the plasma tear into armor instead of his ribs. Chiral was screaming. Syrah was frozen, eyes wide. Marcus grabbed a discarded weapon from the fallen attacker, leveled it, and fired twice center mass into the second assassin. The third turned to flee, but Marcus was faster, tackling them into the wall hard enough to rattle the metal plating beneath the decorative silks. When the last body hit the floor, the corridor smelled like scorched metal and burnt flesh. Marcus's heart was hammering, sweat slick on his neck. He turned back to the girls. "You okay?" he asked. Kyr all nodded shakily. Syrah just ran to him, clinging to his side. That was the scene the queen walked into moments later, her cloak swirling, her eyes scanning the carnage in 2 seconds before locking on her daughters. "Out!" she snapped to the guards rushing in behind her. They obeyed instantly, leaving the hallway empty except for the 4 of them. She looked at Marcus for a long moment. Not the human soldier, not the enemy. Just the man who had once again placed himself between her daughters and death. "You fought my enemies in my halls," she said quietly, "and you bled for it." Marcus glanced down at his arm, where a deep scorch mark marred his sleeve. "Better me than them." The queen didn't answer right away. Instead, she stepped forward and placed a clawed hand lightly on Syrah's shoulder, the other on Kyrill's crest. For the first time since their first meeting, there was no hostility in her gaze when she looked at him. The queen summoned him again, this time not to a private council room but to her war chamber. The space was circular, its walls lined with holomaps showing the territories of both the Varethi Empire and the human-controlled sectors. Generals and advisors stood in a half-circle around the great table, their crests bristling as Marcus stepped in. It wasn't subtle. The disdain on their faces was plain. The queen entered moments later, her cloak sweeping behind her like a wave of crimson. Without preamble, she moved to the head of the table and spoke. "The human Marcus remains under my protection." The murmurs began instantly angry, incredulous. One general stepped forward. "My queen, he is an enemy soldier." "Whatever debt you believe you owe him, it does not erase." Her claws snapped up, silencing him. "You will not question my decision in this chamber." Another voice rose from the back. "And if he becomes a spy? If the humans use him as a conduit for intelligence?" Her eyes narrowed. "Then he will be dealt with, but for now, any who harm him will answer to me." The effect was immediate. The generals stiffened, the room's temperature dropping into a kind of cold, brittle silence. Marcus didn't miss the way some of them avoided the queen's eyes. This wasn't just about him, it was about her power over them. Protecting him was more than gratitude. It was a political move, a declaration of her dominance over factions that had been pushing for escalation in the war. The meeting dissolved soon after, but the ripples it caused were already spreading. In the weeks that followed, reports reached Marcus's ears clashes between loyalists and dissenters within the Queen's own ranks. Commanders who had been eager to launch offensives against human outposts now found themselves without her backing. She hadn't made peace, but she had slowed the war. When Marcus finally approached her about leaving, it was in the quiet of the palace gardens at night. The alien foliage glowed faintly under the twin moons, casting long, strange shadows. "You've given me more freedom than I expected," he said. "But I can't stay here forever. You know that." The queen stood beside a tall, spiraling plant that pulsed with soft blue light, her gaze on the horizon. "You saved my daughters twice. That debt is not easily repaid." "I didn't do it for a debt," Marcus said. "I know." She turned to face him fully. "That is why it matters." For a moment, the two stood in silence, the sounds of the night, a low, distant hum of alien insects filling the space between them. Finally, she spoke again, her voice quieter than he had ever heard it in the throne room. "Perhaps our people do not have to remain enemies." Marcus gave a short, almost skeptical laugh. One queen and one soldier won't rewrite history. Her gaze didn't waver. No, but history has been rewritten before by smaller chances. The next morning, she came to the landing bay herself when his ship was prepared. Kyril and Sira were there too, each holding one of her hands. Neither of them let go until the very last moment. Before he boarded, the queen stepped close enough that her voice was for him alone. "If our people meet again in war, I will remember this. And I will make sure others remember too." Marcus nodded once. "Fair enough." He didn't salute, didn't bow, just turned and walked up the ramp as the ship rose into the night sky. The queen stood with her daughters, watching until the lights of the craft vanished among the stars. The war was not over, but a thread had been woven between two enemies, thin, fragile, and almost invisible. Sometimes, though, the smallest threads were the ones that held the weight of history.